What if I told you that the person helping police search for a missing teenager was actually the killer himself? That for days, he walked investigators through the exact crime scene, pointed them toward fake suspects, and even joined the victim's family in their desperate search, all while knowing exactly where the body was buried. What if I told you that this killer was so brazen, so calculated in his deception, that he actually guided search teams over the very ground where he had secretly buried his victim? This is the story of one of the most chilling cases of deception in modern criminal history, where cold-blooded murderer didn't just hide from justice. He actively participated in the investigation of his own crime. If you're fascinated by cases where the truth hides in plain sight, where evil wears the mask of a good Samaritan, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because on Dark Trail Files, we dive deep into the mysteries that will keep you awake at night.
And it's just one thing after another. But he's a friend of mine.
Sure. You don't get rid of friends.
Meet James Brenner, a weathered, 62-year-old farmer scratching out a living in Utah's unforgiving desert landscape. To everyone around him, he appeared to be just another concerned neighbor helping police locate 19-year-old Dylan Rounds, who had vanished without explanation from his remote farm in Box Elder County. With his sun-beaten face and calloused hands, Brenner looked like every other hardscrabble rancher trying to make ends meet in one of America's most isolated regions. But what law enforcement didn't realize was that this seemingly helpful neighbor was leading them through the very building where he had brutally murdered Dylan just days before. The high desert of northwestern Utah is a place where neighbors are few and far between, where the nearest town might be 50 miles away, and where people learn to be self-reliant or they don't survive. It's a landscape that can swallow secrets whole, where a person can disappear without a trace and never be found. In this harsh, beautiful, and utterly unforgiving environment, 19-year-old Dylan Rounds was trying to carve out his piece of the American dream. Dylan Rounds wasn't your typical teenager scrolling through social media and worried about weekend plans. At just 19, he had already purchased 640 acres of harsh desert land with his grandfather for nearly $300,000, determined to build a farming empire from nothing but sand, sagebrush, and sheer determination. His ambition was infectious, his dreams enormous, and his work ethic legendary among those who knew him. Dylan would rise before dawn, work until sunset, and fall asleep planning the next day's tasks. He was the kind of young man who made his family proud and his community hopeful about the future. But in the isolated expanse of Utah's backcountry, where the nearest neighbor might be miles away and cell phone service is spotty at best, big dreams can make you vulnerable. Success can breed resentment. And sometimes, the people you trust most are the ones harboring the darkest intentions. Dylan's daily routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Every morning, he would text or call his family, sharing updates about his progress, his challenges, and his unwavering optimism about turning his desert acreage into productive farmland. He was in constant communication with his parents, his grandfather, and the small network of people who supported his ambitious venture. So when that communication suddenly stopped, alarm bells immediately started ringing. It started like so many missing person cases do, with a phone call from worried family members who couldn't reach their loved one. Dylan's relatives hadn't heard from him in over 48 hours, an eternity for a young man who stayed in constant contact with those he cared about. The silence was deafening, completely out of character, and deeply unsettling. When they drove the long, dusty road to his property to check on him, they found his red Ford truck abandoned near his trailer, damaged and sitting eerily empty in the desert heat. Most disturbing of all, his guns were missing from the trailer, weapons Dylan kept for protection in the remote wilderness.
Last known location. His camper is about 4 miles back up this way by his pond, and we're really thinking he might have taken off and gone across. Because there's been no phone calls on his phone.
Yeah, no. I did get a ping.
Okay.
Last location was 15.4 miles from the phone line tower,
Okay.
which puts him on this back road.
So I wonder if would that hit him walking? Okay, I really do. I know my son, and that's the shortest route to his camp.
If he walked, that road ends right out there. If he walked, he would have come to the corner, cut across this field.
But that's his closest cell phone, Pete. Not in town, it's out here.
Mm-hmm. Off of that road. The back road into the compound.
Didn't we go down to where it is?
Yeah.
It ends out there at the old cabin, doesn't it?
But that's where the ping
But
was.
that's where the ping was.
He was out there?
Yeah, and
So are you guys,
I used to work with Dylan, my brother's grandfather.
I'm the guy that's supposed to keep an eye on.
A Box Elder County deputy was immediately dispatched to Dylan's isolated farm to meet with his increasingly distraught family. The drive to Dylan's property is a journey into emptiness. Mile after mile of scrub brush, ancient rock formations, and endless sky. It's the kind of place where you can drive for an hour without seeing another human being, where the silence is so complete it seems to press against your eardrums. But fate intervened when James Brenner intercepted the officer en route, flagging him down with the urgency of someone who had crucial information about the missing teenager. In what would later be recognized as a masterclass in psychological manipulation and misdirection, Brenner immediately launched into a detailed explanation of what he believed had happened to Dylan. With the confidence of someone who had clearly given the matter serious thought, he pointed investigators toward Chase Venstra, a local criminal with a violent history who had recently encountered Dylan in what Brenner described as a threatening confrontation. The deputy found Brenner's eagerness to help both impressive and slightly suspicious, especially when the farmer made an offhand comment about the importance of preserving the crime scene before any crime had been confirmed. It was a chilling slip of the tongue that revealed knowledge no innocent person should have possessed, a verbal mistake that would later take on sinister significance as investigators peeled back the layers of deception. Dylan's mother, her voice shaking with worry and fear, confirmed that her son had indeed had a troubling run-in with Chase Venstra just days before his disappearance. Venstra was a known thief, drug user, and troublemaker who had terrorized the small community of Montello, Nevada, for years. He had a documented history of armed standoffs with police, multiple arrests for violence and weapons charges, and was well known throughout the region for all the wrong reasons. To investigators arriving at the scene, Chase seemed like the perfect suspect, dangerous, desperate, with a history of violence, and with clear motive to target someone as successful and vulnerable as Dylan. The fact that Dylan's guns were missing only strengthened the case against Chase. Everyone knew he was constantly in need of money for drugs, and firearms were valuable commodities that could be quickly sold or traded. The timeline seemed to fit perfectly, and Chase's violent history made him the obvious perpetrator in what appeared to be a robbery gone wrong.
Jim guy says that Dylan been in town at the bar, whatever, bragging about how much money he makes and this and that. But I talked to, and it doesn't really sound like my son.
After gathering initial information from Dylan's increasingly panicked parents, Brenner arrived at the scene with his close friend Donald Hatley, both men claiming they wanted to help with the search effort. Brenner lived in a small trailer near Dylan's farm and occasionally helped the young man with various chores and farming tasks, while Donald was a longtime family friend who had mentored Dylan's farming ambitions and watched him grow from a dreamy teenager into a determined young entrepreneur. To everyone present, the worried family members, the investigating officers, the gathering volunteers, they appeared to be concerned neighbors doing their civic duty, stepping up at a crisis to help find a missing member of their small, tight-knit community. In reality, both men were harboring dark, devastating secrets about Dylan's fate. The helpful neighbor and the family friend were not the good Samaritans they appear to be, but rather conspirators in a cover-up that would last for over 2 years and devastate everyone who loved Dylan Rounds. The first concrete evidence that something terrible had happened emerged when searchers discovered Dylan's work boots, heavily stained with dried blood, discarded roughly 100 yards south of the grain shed where Dylan had been working. The discovery sent chills through the search team. This was no longer a simple missing person case where a young man might have wandered off and gotten lost in the desert. The blood on those boots told a different, much darker story. Deputies immediately secured the boots for DNA testing and expanded their search perimeter, bringing in additional resources and personnel. But they had no way of knowing that the most crucial piece of evidence, Dylan's cell phone, lay 20 feet underwater in a nearby pond, still containing video footage that would eventually expose the truth about his final moments.
Twice. Went down yesterday afternoon, looked around. Hadn't been in his bed. His ticket's locked. All the equipment was supposed to be there.
Is his trailer open?
He never locks it. It doesn't lock anyway. Today I took Jim down there with me and we did a little more thorough search.
And he wasn't in the camper. It doesn't look like anybody's been around.
I checked. It's been raining off and on since Saturday, so any fresh tracks were kind of mushed out.
Yeah.
He was on that back road down there. We had to go look that way. I didn't realize it.
I don't know how. Can you guys show us? I mean,
I don't
we're
know how
not
they would do it though, and he had the green truck.
No,
walking. That doesn't mean that's his exact location. That's the closest cell phone
That's
ping.
the last ping for whether he tried to use it or the last location it updated before it died.
What time was that? Does it tell you?
And that was at 14:58.
So right after
So
he dropped,
just before 3 o'clock.
right after you left. So he must have pulled in right behind you, dropped off the grain truck, and I'm telling you, I bet you he took.
Based on Brenner's carefully constructed and seemingly helpful timeline, whatever had happened to Dylan occurred between 1:30 and 9 p.m. on May 28th, 2022, precisely the hours when Brenner claimed to be having a leisurely dinner with Donald Hatley at a local restaurant. Police verified this alibi with Donald, who readily and convincingly confirmed their dinner plans, even providing specific details about their conversation and the meals they had ordered. It was a perfectly orchestrated deception, with both men corroborating each other's stories with the kind of detail that made investigators believe they were telling the truth. What law enforcement didn't know was that both men were lying, that they had planned this deception from the moment Dylan's body hit the ground, and that every detail of their alibi had been carefully rehearsed and coordinated. As hours stretched into days and days stretched into weeks, the investigation expanded dramatically. The search for Dylan rounds became one of the largest missing person investigations in Utah's recent history. Helicopters swept the endless desert landscape, their rotors chopping through air so clear you could see for miles in every direction. Volunteer search parties, some traveling from hundreds of miles away, combed through endless acres of scrubland, checking every gulch, every abandoned building, every place a body might be hidden or a young man might have sought shelter. Dylan's family launched their own desperate investigation, posting flyers throughout the region, organizing search parties, and following up on every tip, no matter how unlikely it seemed. They drove thousands of miles, knocked on hundreds of doors, and spoke to anyone who might have seen Dylan or had information about his disappearance. Their anguish was visible to everyone who met them. The hollow eyes, the trembling voices, the way they clung to every scrap of hope while fearing the worst. Chase Venstra became the primary suspect in everyone's minds, the focus of an intense manhunt that stretched across 3 states. But when officers arrived at his last known address to arrest him on unrelated domestic violence charges, he had vanished, seemingly confirming his guilt in everyone's minds. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Why would an innocent man run unless he had something to hide? The manhunt for Chase led investigators deep into the criminal underworld of the rural West, a network of drug dealers, thieves, and violent criminals who move freely across state lines and often live completely off the grid. They tracked him to the notorious Montello Cowboy Bar, a rough establishment where fights were common, drugs were easily available, and questions weren't asked about people's backgrounds or current legal troubles. There, investigators learned disturbing new details about Chase's capacity for explosive violence. Bar patrons and employees described recent incidents where he had pistol-whipped other patrons over minor disputes, threatened people with knives, and generally terrorized anyone who crossed him. One witness described seeing Chase beat a man unconscious with a beer bottle over a $20 debt. Another told police about a night when Chase had held a gun to someone's head over a perceived insult. Everything pointed to Chase Venstra as Dylan's killer, while the real perpetrator continued helping with the search, offering comfort to Dylan's family, and providing investigators with additional tips and insights about where Dylan might be found. Meanwhile, Dylan's family uncovered information suggesting Chase might have had an accomplice in whatever had happened to Dylan. Multiple sources pointed to Robert Alesh, a man with his own outstanding criminal warrant who had reportedly given Chase a ride to Dylan's property on the day he disappeared. When police finally tracked down Robert, he readily admitted to giving Chase transportation, but insisted he knew nothing about Dylan's fate and had never seen the young man. Like everyone else in the community, Robert believed Chase was the guilty party and expressed shock that anyone would think he was involved. Nothing about Dylan's fate and had never seen the young man. Like everyone else in the community, Robert believed Chase was the guilty party and expressed shock that anyone would think he was involved.
What's your name?
Candace Cooley,
Candace Cooley. And you are?
Dylan's mother.
Okay. And you are?
Justin Rounds, Dylan's dad.
Dylan's dad. Okay. When did Dylan go missing?
Saturday, May 28th.
When was the last time you saw Dylan?
I seen him that Monday before.
So 5-6 days before he went
Yeah.
missing. Where are we physically located at this
We are
moment?
in the shed the grain truck was parked in.
So we are currently at Dylan's last known location?
Yes.
Then something strange and deeply unsettling happened. Someone had quietly returned to Dylan's trailer under cover of darkness, moving through the crime scene like a ghost and tampering with evidence that had already been cataloged by investigators. Items that had previously been missing were suddenly returned, placed carefully back in their original positions, as if nothing had ever happened. Other items that had been present during the initial search were now gone, removed with surgical precision by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. It was clear that whoever was responsible for Dylan's disappearance was still actively trying to cover their tracks, manipulating the crime scene even as police investigators continued their work. This wasn't the behavior of someone who had committed a crime of passion and then fled. This was the calculated, methodical work of someone who was thinking several steps ahead, someone who understood how police investigations worked and was actively trying to stay ahead of them. During this period of mounting confusion and frustration, Dylan's father shared troubling information with investigators about a previous confrontation involving James Brenner that had occurred several months before Dylan's disappearance. He described a heated dispute over livestock that had escalated when Brenner felt Dylan and his grandfather had disrespected him or undermined his authority in some way. According to Dylan's father, Brenner had become increasingly agitated during the argument, eventually threatening to blow his head off while gesturing toward Dylan. The threat had been serious enough that Brenner had actually walked down a farm lane carrying a large pistol, his intentions unclear but his anger unmistakable. Only the intervention of Dylan's grandfather, who had years of experience dealing with difficult neighbors, had managed to calm Brenner down and defuse the situation. While the conflict had seemingly been resolved through conversation and compromise, it painted a disturbing picture of James Brenner as a man capable of explosive, potentially deadly violence when he felt crossed or disrespected. It also established a clear history of conflict between Brenner and Dylan, contradicting Brenner's claims that they had always gotten along well. This revelation prompted investigators to dig deeper into Brenner's background, and what they uncovered was deeply troubling. Far from being the simple, law-abiding farmer he presented himself as, Brenner had an extensive criminal history that included convictions for aggravated assault, multiple weapons charges, domestic violence incidents, and an active federal warrant for illegal firearm possession. He had spent time in both state and federal prison, had violated parole multiple times, and had a documented history of threatening behavior toward neighbors and family members. Most disturbing of all was a pattern that emerged from police reports going back decades. James Brenner had a history of inserting himself into police investigations, offering information and assistance, while simultaneously deflecting suspicion from himself. In at least 2 previous cases involving theft and vandalism in the area, Brenner had been among the first to contact police and offer his help, even though he was later suspected of being involved in the crimes himself. Suddenly, the helpful neighbor looked less like a good Samaritan and more like a master manipulator who had been playing a long game with law enforcement for years. Officers moved quickly to arrest Brenner on his outstanding federal warrant, spotting him casually returning to the grain shed with Donald Hatley, as if nothing had changed. Even while being handcuffed and read his rights, Brenner continued pointing fingers at Chase and Robert, maintaining his helpful facade and expressing concern for Dylan's welfare right up until the moment he was placed in the back of a patrol car and transported to jail. During his initial interrogation, Brenner appeared genuinely convinced that Chase and Robert were responsible for Dylan's disappearance. He provided detailed information about other local criminals who might have targeted the young farmer, seeming fully cooperative and helpful even while behind bars. He drew maps showing where he thought Dylan's body might be hidden, suggested search areas that hadn't been thoroughly examined, and even offered to participate in additional searches once he was released. But experienced investigators noticed something deeply unsettling about his word choices and body language. Throughout hours of questioning, Brenner repeatedly spoke about Dylan in past tense, as if he already knew the teenager was dead. When asked about the possibility that Dylan might still be alive, possibly injured and hiding somewhere in the desert, Brenner would shake his head sadly and talk about what happened to that poor boy rather than what might have happened. It was a subtle but telling distinction that suggested knowledge no innocent person should possess. The investigation took another significant turn when officers finally located and arrested Chase Venstra at a drug house in Nevada, ending a manhunt that had lasted several weeks. In a strategic move designed to pressure both suspects, investigators placed Chase in a jail cell directly above Brenner, hoping one of them might slip up and reveal crucial information about Dylan's fate. The tactic initially backfired when Chase, desperate to get out of jail and facing serious charges, tried to bargain information about Dylan's disappearance in exchange for dropped charges. He claimed to have knowledge about what had happened to Dylan, but insisted he wouldn't talk unless prosecutors agreed to a deal he found acceptable, a negotiation investigators couldn't make without concrete evidence of his involvement. For weeks, the two men lived in adjacent cells, sometimes talking through the ventilation system, sometimes maintaining hostile silence, while investigators listened to every word through hidden recording devices. But neither man revealed anything that moved the case forward, and both continued to maintain their innocence. A month after Dylan's disappearance, police received what seemed like a promising report about a suspicious burial site discovered by hunters in a remote area of the desert. Hopes soared briefly as investigators rushed to the location with excavation equipment and forensic specialists, only to discover that the site contained the remains of several dead dogs rather than the missing teenager they desperately sought to find. It was a crushing disappointment that highlighted just how vast and unforgiving the search area was, and how easy it would be for someone familiar with the terrain to hide a body where it might never be found. Just as the case seemed destined for the cold case files, Donald Hatley reached out to police with stunning information he claimed to have kept hidden since Dylan's disappearance. He revealed that immediately after Dylan vanished, James Brenner had brought him several firearms to hide, claiming he feared losing the weapons if he was arrested on his outstanding federal warrant. The timing was devastating for Brenner's claims of innocence. Why would a truly innocent man be hiding guns at the exact moment his neighbor disappeared? And why had Donald waited so long to share this crucial information with investigators? Donald's revelation opened a new avenue of investigation and raised serious questions about his own level of involvement in whatever had happened to Dylan. Had he been an unwilling accomplice, pressured into helping hide evidence? Or was he a co-conspirator who had helped plan and execute Dylan's murder? The breakthrough investigators had been desperately waiting for came over a year later, through one of the most unlikely sources imaginable. Brenner's cellmate in the Box Elder County Jail contacted police with information that would finally crack the case wide open. During months of incarceration together, sharing the close quarters and endless hours that define jail life, Brenner had gradually revealed the horrifying details of Dylan's murder to the one person he thought he could trust. According to the cellmate, who had been carefully documenting every conversation for months, the killing had stemmed from Brenner's growing irritation over Dylan repeatedly using the grain shed that Brenner considered his personal workspace and storage area. Despite having no legal claim to the building, Brenner had come to view it as his own private domain and resented what he saw as Dylan's intrusion into his space. The cellmate described how Brenner had recounted the events of May 28th 2022, with chilling detail and apparent pride in his ability to deceive investigators. According to Brenner's confession, he had confronted Dillon about using the grain shed without permission, and the argument had quickly escalated into a physical confrontation when Dillon refused to back down. The confrontation had escalated dramatically when Dillon, perhaps trying to defend himself or demonstrate that he wouldn't be intimidated, picked up Brenner's .45 caliber pistol and fired it near Brenner's ear during their argument. Whether Dillon intended the shot as a warning or was fired accidentally during their struggle remained unclear, but the blast had enraged Brenner and triggered the violent finale to their conflict. In the ensuing struggle for control of the weapon, Dillon had accidentally shot himself in the leg, a wound that would have been painful but not necessarily fatal. However, rather than helping the injured young man or calling for medical assistance, Brenner had overpowered the wounded Dillon and executed him with a .22 caliber rifle, 2 shots to the head that ended the young farmer's life instantly and silenced his dreams forever. The confession provided investigators with crucial details they could verify independently, lending credibility to the cellmate's account. Brenner had described using a backhoe from Dillon's own equipment to transport the body to a carefully chosen burial site several miles away, a location so remote and well-concealed that search teams had unknowingly driven over it multiple times without detecting anything suspicious. He had methodically disposed of evidence, throwing Dillon's cell phone into a nearby pond, burning blood-stained clothing and other materials that might link him to the crime, and cleaning the grain shed so thoroughly that initial forensic examination had found no obvious signs of violence. It was the work of someone who had given considerable thought to covering his tracks and avoiding detection. But James Brenner had made one fatal mistake that would ultimately lead to his downfall. When he threw Dillon's phone into the pond, believing he was destroying the last piece of evidence that could connect him to the crime, the device was still recording. The phone had captured damning video evidence of Brenner in the immediate aftermath of the murder, showing him cleaning a gun while wearing a blood-stained shirt, his face clearly visible and his actions unmistakably suspicious. When investigators finally retrieved the phone from the murky water and had its contents analyzed by forensic specialists, they found not only the incriminating video, but also GPS data that confirmed Brenner's device had traveled to the pond on the day Dillon disappeared, despite his claims that he had been having dinner with Donald Hatley miles away. DNA evidence from Dillon's bloody boots provided the final, irrefutable nail in Brenner's coffin. Laboratory analysis revealed not only Dillon's blood, as expected, but also Brenner's touch DNA on the boots, microscopic skin cells that had been transferred when he handled the boots, most likely while moving Dillon's body or staging the crime scene. It was physical proof that linked him directly to the crime and contradicted every aspect of his carefully constructed story. Faced with overwhelming evidence that destroyed his carefully maintained facade of innocence, Brenner finally abandoned his charade of helpful cooperation. His lawyers, recognizing that their client faced almost certain conviction and a possible death sentence, entered into plea negotiations with prosecutors. In exchange for avoiding a death penalty trial and the possibility of execution, Brenner agreed to lead investigators to Dillon's remains and provide a full confession detailing exactly what had happened. In the spring of 2024, nearly 2 years after Dillon's disappearance, James Brenner guided law enforcement officers to the remote burial site where he had hidden his victim's body. The location was exactly as he had described to his cellmate, so remote and well-concealed that it would likely never have been found without his direct assistance. After careful excavation by forensic specialists, investigators recovered Dillon's skeletal remains. Only bones and fragments of clothing had survived after more than 2 years in the harsh desert environment. It was a heartbreaking conclusion to a case that had consumed the lives of everyone involved, but it finally provided Dillon's family with the closure they had desperately needed. On May 15, 2024, James Brenner appeared in court and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and federal firearm possession charges. The courtroom was packed with Dillon's family members, friends, and community supporters who had followed the case from the beginning. As Brenner stood before the judge and formally admitted his guilt, many in the courtroom wept for Dillon for his family, and for the senseless waste of a young life full of promise. On July 1st, 2024, James Brenner was sentenced to up to 45 years in prison, 3 concurrent terms of 1 to 15 years each for the murder charge and related offenses. At 62 years old, it was effectively a life sentence that ensured he would never again have the opportunity to deceive investigators or harm another innocent person. Justice had finally been served for Dylan Rounds, but it came at an unthinkable cost. The loss of a vibrant young man whose only crime had been working hard to achieve his dreams in an unforgiving landscape. The case of Dylan Rounds serves as a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always lurk in shadowy alleyways or hide behind obvious criminal behavior. Sometimes it presents itself as helpful neighbor, a concerned community member, or someone eager to assist in the search for justice. The most dangerous predators are often those who understand how to manipulate our trust, who know exactly what to say and how to act to avoid suspicion while continuing their deception. For Dylan's family, the revelation that someone they had trusted, someone who had sat with them during their darkest hours and offered comfort during their desperate search, had been the killer all along added an extra layer of trauma to their unimaginable loss. It was a betrayal that went beyond murder. It was a psychological torture that had lasted for over 2 years. What other cases have you encountered where the killer was hiding among those trying to help? Have you ever had an experience where someone you trusted turned out to be deceiving you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Dark Trail Files for more deep dives into the cases that expose the darkest corners of human nature and remind us that sometimes the most dangerous person in a room is the one offering to help.